open it for you. All right. All right. Welcome, you guys. Okay. All right. I'm going to do my spiel and then I'll hand it over to Igor and Ellen. All right. Where is it? There we go. All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will be presenting Common Issues Emerging from Classification and Compensation Studies by Igor and Ellen Wandel. As usually, just a little housekeeping just before we get started. This session is being recorded. At the end of the webinar, I will provide links for accessing the recording in the chat, so please stay tuned. To ensure a high quality recording, all attendees are encouraged to mute your mic. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation if time allows, or they will answer during the presentation. It's up to them. Now, without further ado, Igor and Ellen, please take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I forget you're on the West Coast. I'm actually in Ohio. So good morning, everyone. Today, we are presenting to you critical classification and compensation issues facing HR departments. My name is Ellen Wandel. I'm the manager of Class and Comp with CPS HR, and I have with me today Igor Shegelov. He is our compensation technical expert. So before we get started in the actual presentation, we need to talk about the labor market. And the labor market goes up, it goes down, but it never dies and it never changes. So HR departments have to know what to do concerning the labor market and how to address the labor market.
As we go into conversation and discussion about the state of labor market in the United States, I just wanted to make a quick intro and tell you about Clayton Christensen, who Economist magazine called the most influential management thinker of his time. In his book, Innovator Dilemma, Clayton Christensen actually wrote about supreme rationality, saying some companies have an excellent view of the labor market analysis, the very detailed and thorough examination of new trends, and yet they fail to recognize some of those new trends.
Igor, do you mean like Blockbuster and Redbox not seeing streaming services coming?
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. Blockbuster actually knew about streaming services as a new innovative approach to television and streaming, and they analyzed that. They looked into this, but because they were so analytical and so carefully and closely detailed and discussed the issue, they actually didn't see its potential. And the reason we're talking about this is because we believe that many HR policies, they're well analyzed, they're well defined and discussed and well intended, and yet they don't work. And that's why some of HR departments actually face those issues that we're going to discuss today.
So post-COVID, the labor market has been quite a curious case. Currently, the US sits at 10.6 million job openings, but only 6 million job seekers. In theory, that could be close to 2 job openings for every applicant. Unfortunately, companies are looking for skilled workers in professional and technical healthcare industries that they simply cannot find.
And interesting that not only there's so many openings in the labor market, and even though the labor market started showing signs of cooling, especially in the first quarter of 2023, we still cannot fill those jobs, still cannot fill the vacancy. And partially it's because of, there's many reasons for it, but partially because of many workers retiring. Like during pandemic, actually, there were 3.5 million early retirements, repositioning of employees throughout the different industries. Some of them reluctant to come back to work And of course, HR doesn't respond immediately to those trends. We can show you actually in this slide what's happening in distribution and industrial growth. We call this slide, and during the presentation, we're going to use some of the quotation of and this one actually is, again, rephrase of Ernest Hemingway short story called End Short Happy Life, End of Short Happy Life of, and we're rephrasing this, retail and hospitality. You can see in this slide that in the last decade, some of the industries actually added significant number of workers. Specifically, take a look at transportation and warehousing. The numbers are in thousands, so those are millions of workers actually. So transportation added from 5.8 million workers in 2010, another more than 1 million workers to almost 2 million in 2020. Same as construction, financial activities, real estate, professional technical service, and of course, healthcare and social assistance. Now that growth is actually coming at the expense of some other industries. You can see leisure and hospitality and retail are shrinking in numbers. Employees or number of jobs and workers actually in leisure and hospitality went down from 12.5 million to 11.5. That is the trend that is followed by some other trends that we will discuss.
We mentioned previously that workers are retiring or repositioning. For the past 100 years, Americans have migrated to the West and South, leaving the Midwest and Northwest regions. The healthcare, technical, and professional services industries continue to soar in these regions, while they also provide desirable locations for retirement. As shown on this graph, this trend started long before the pandemic. It is expected to continue for years to come. The first area we're going to talk about, and the main area, is the main issues HR departments face. So one of the main issues that HR departments face is that workers complain their pay is capped at the top. Igor, where do employers look to fix this problem?
I think this is important and very common issue that HR department face, and the reason and the core issue is in pay structure or pay progression practices. HR department should really look at why employees are at the top so fast, and why they're not moving, or their pay structure is not moving, or maybe pay structures are too narrow. Some of the agencies have only 5 pay steps actually within the range. There's only 21% spread or bandwidth between minimum and maximum. And that means that workers get to the top in 4 years. In 4 years, you're already at the maximum. And if your salary structure is not moving year over year, you will stay at the maximum. And of course, there will be complaints and dissatisfaction on behalf of employees.
The next issue is that recruiters cannot hire new qualified workers at the minimum of the salary range.
And that also a very common issue. Maybe a few decades ago, this was not a problem. Maybe in the middle of 20th century. It is now because of labor market influences. I mean, how would you expect that experienced, well-experienced employee, job candidate, actually would accept your job offer to get at the minimum of the pay range? Typically, employees measure and assess their credentials, their experience, their education, their input, their past work history. They don't want to be at the minimum. So pay policy and labor market practices are in the core of this issue, and that's where we need to look at when we face something like this.
Igor, the next issue is that minimum wage increases have created pay compressions.
And that is happening because minimum wages, while being dormant for many years. I mean, how many years we had federal $7.25 minimum wage, and it didn't move. And all of a sudden, starting approximately 2016, we observed rapid growth of minimum wages. Either states administered their own increases, or they actually states tie the pay increases to inflation. And they say if inflation goes 5 or whatever, 7% or 3%, so will the minimum wage in the state. And the only way to address this is decompression, because those minimum wages pushing other ranges for jobs in technical, non-exempt kind of area, semi-skilled and skilled support jobs, they push them up higher.
Igor, supervisors sometimes complain that their subordinates earn more than them.
Again, that was an issue we observed with many of our clients, and job labeling and separation between pay grades, or separation between classification within job series or job families. That's where we have to look and understand why is it happening. There are certain standards or benchmarks how, let's say, subordinate and supervisor should be separated in terms of their pay grades, not just the salary. And of course, the issue is exacerbated by the fact that some of the subordinates, some of the individual contributors have more experience and they grow within the organization. And while supervisors have less experience. But then again, a good leveling and separation between pay grades would probably help you to mitigate those issues.
Igor, pay inequities can cause dissatisfaction and a potential liability for organizations.
And pay equity, that's interesting. For many years, I mean, we had 1963 Equal Pay Act, amendment to FLSA. And for many years, it was a legal mandate. But now, last decade, it actually becoming more part of the culture of the in the organization in the United States and the labor force. 48 states actually has their own minimum the pay equity legislation, and again, many of them require pay audits and pay transparency and some other provisions. This is where we should look at, and how to conduct pay equity audit is a separate topic. We're not going to talk much about this today.
Igor, workers may question the pay increase methodology used by their employers.
They always do. And by the way, the reason we mark some of the answers in red, because we're gonna those highlighted in red actually will be discussed more in detail in this presentation. And yes, you have to look at labor market wage increases. What are the approaches? How do you determine what is the increase, or what kind of increase you implement? Who gets the increase? Is it across the board? Is it based on performance? Is it based on a market, or it's a combination? We'll talk about it a little more during this presentation.
Igor, a lag in competitive pay can cause turnover.
Market wage and compensation studies, that's the answer. Monitoring external labor market. You pretty much look at comparable matching benchmarks in the labor market. Federal government has actually guidelines calling this comparability, wage comparability studies. We call it market wage studies. And again, the influence of labor markets, external markets, increasing year over year, decade over decade, and that's what we should do. We should monitor wages for certain jobs and probably identify our relevant labor market and follow it.
And finally, your workers' actual job duties are no longer consistent with their written job descriptions.
It happens, Ellen, when jobs evolve significantly, especially lately, and as they evolve, they change the level of complexity, the content of the job, the context, and of course requirements, qualification requirements for the job. And employees gradually have to pick up additional tasks, and they grow, they perform job outside of their original job description duties and responsibilities and tasks defined by those documents. And this is where we perform job analysis. You really have to look at the content, the context of the job, the qualification requirements, how jobs change, why they change, what we should do. And of course, with changing job content, job values may change as well. And that's where we have to go to, again, external and internal evaluation of those jobs.
Igor, a question from the audience has come up. Do you think that employees' sense of entitlement has played a role in class and comp issues?
Well, yeah, I can actually tell you that in short, I know this is a short presentation, that sometimes we feed that sense of, first of all, the answer is yes. And sometimes we actually create situation or create the field where that sense of entitlement is being actually created, is being promoted. For example, this is a personal opinion, of course. One of those HR policies are fixed step systems, increases, where you say every year you're entitled to 5% increase. And that's where employees, they already know, they expect this, and they don't really think much about fiscal availability or about sustainability, about business side of the organization, and about external economic conditions. They just want those 5%. In some cases where, and we will talk about this, where employees got used to cost of living adjustments. They, of course, now demand cost of living match CPI-U. And that's what we typically do not recommend. And we'll explain why later. I hope I answered that question. Let's move on.
So our first topic that we'll discuss in depth today is pay structure. Pay structure was historically undervalued and misunderstood. Pay structure impacts structural integrity, affects pay progression, organizes employee actions such as promotions and transfers, and is needed in job leveling to separate classes within job families.
And Ellen and I prepared for you this visual slide that will maybe illustrate why this is important to monitor and evaluate your design, assess your design of the pay structure, including bandwidths, like Ellen suggested, the spread from minimum to maximum of the range of the pay grade, midpoint separation, how those grades separated, grade overlap, and all that. So imagine that this is your agency pay range from minimum to maximum, and of course the midpoint. And let's say, for example, that the main control point that we typically use is the median of the labor market, or 50th percentile. I mean, you have to have some kind of orientation, some parameters that you match, that you compare yourself to. So let's say you can see here that wage market range not only positioned a little bit higher than your agency's range, but it also widened. It's let's say that if this range here is 25%, then market range could be 40% for the same job, for similar jobs in the labor market. And what happens here is that you create variance from midpoint to midpoint. And of course, minimum is lower, as you can see in your agency, than the labor market. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to adjust this, at least the minimums, because it impedes your recruitment practices, recruitment methods. So once you align your minimums, you still lack in the midpoint. Midpoint is still separated, and of course, maximum is still below the labor market maximum. So whatever you will try to do, let's say align midpoints or align maximums, you can see in this case, for example, if you align midpoints, but your bandwidth is narrow versus typical labor market for similar jobs, then now what you do is you overpay the minimum. You actually don't have to spend that much money, and the labor market, in the labor market, employees actually can be brought to lower wage. The only way to address this is study your relevant labor market with whom you compete and where you lose and gain your qualified staff, and try to understand the pattern of their bandwidth, of their pay range, and try to replicate it in your pay structure design.
The graph on your screen shows salary structure adjustments, the actual 2022 adjustments versus the projected 2023 adjustments in the southern and western regions of the US. This is from World at Work. Pay structure is dynamic and it should move with the market, but not always at the same rate. Our observation is that pay structures move at 1/2 of ECI. Igor, can you explain to us what ECI is and why we should be using it?
Yes, absolutely, Ellen. And yeah, this is very important observation that we're making. Pay structure moves half of ECI, which is Employment Cost Index. That's a measure, indicator that is used by Bureau of Labor Statistics. Essentially, the indication of increases in wages and salaries in different occupations and overall in civilian labor force in the United States. So if CPI, Consumer Price Index, is increased over year increase in cost of wages, cost of goods and services, then ECI is year-over-year increase in wages and salaries. Essentially, it's a self-explanatory employment cost index, like how much payroll cost employers year-over-year and how much it increases. Now, for the last decade, just to give you a perspective, for the last decade, average ECI, employment cost index, was anywhere from 2.5 to 3%. And it all changed post-pandemic in 2021, 2022. At the end of 2022, ECI doubled, almost doubled. It was 5.2% at the end of last year. And of course, you can see here that projected, and this is based on World at Work study. They polled multiple organizations in different industries in different sizes, and you see that on average, employers project 2.5 to 2.7% increase of their pay structure, not the wages, but pay structures. We're going to move to next slide, and I just wanted to explain why moving employee wages and in some cases even pay structures with CPI or with minimum wage across the board with the same exact percentage is, we believe, is not the best practice that can serve you, your organization well. Increasing all wages with new minimum wage, for example, would probably create compression, pay dispersion, and will cause wage inflation and, of course, cost impact. Just imagine if some states, just like we discussed, some states, including Colorado, California, Arizona, they tie minimum wage increase every year to CPI-U, Consumer Price Index, Urban Composite, year over year. And CPI-U is very volatile. So at the end of 2022, CPI-U was 8.2%. So some states like Arizona, for example, increased minimum wages by 8.2%. So what happened there is it created a lot of compression with other pay grades, with other job classification. And of course, when you do that, if you move all the pay structure, all pay grades, what happens is some of your employees will be outside of the new pay range. Some will require increase to be at the minimum. Others will require adjustments because they will be outside of the maximum. The linear, the even increase of all wages is not something we would recommend. This is how we propose deal with compression in your pay structures. If you in this kind of situation where minimum wage is pushing you every year, pushing lower level and higher level classes. So imagine that this is here, 2022 pay structure, and you started your minimum at 1280. This is illustrative only, this is just an example. And this is actually minimum wage in your state. In this illustration, you can see that we built a very fixed pay structure with 40% width spread from minimum maximum and 5% even separation between pay grades. So imagine that your minimum wage, just like it happened in some states, went up 8% with CPI. In this case, $1.05. Now, if you increase all your, just like we discussed, all your wages, all your pay grades by 8.2%, you probably will inflate your pay grades, inflate your external job evaluations. So what we propose to do is find somewhere point in your pay structure where you stop that, where the compression ends. Like in this case, we propose grade 105, and this 1556 will not be increased by 8%, will be increased by 2.5%, just like in Ellen's recommended scale that suggested that all pay structures on average will move 2.5%. So we move grade 105 and all consecutive pay grades by 2.5%. They will, most of them will maintain in this case. And again, you don't stop at 110. We're just showing you a segment of the pay structure. So you just move all of it, excuse me, to 2.5%. And now imagine that you still have gap between 101 and 104. And that's where you just apply simple, this is one of many different solutions. You don't have to use it. But the way we propose to do that is we actually even offer you a simple formula. We say, find your compression endpoint. In this case, compression endpoint is minimum of grade 105. Subtract new minimum wage, which is 1385, divided by number of grades between them, and then added to each previous pay grade. And you can see that you have smaller separations. So you kind of mitigate compression between 101 and 105. And then 105 and all other pay grades up to, I don't know, 20, 30 pay grades that you have will only move 2.5%. I hope this makes sense and it helps you.
Now that we've talked about pay structure, we're going to talk about wage market studies. The graph on the next page shows that the employer cost index for certain industries of jobs and the changes of them from 2011 through 2021. The chart shows, as you can see, the ECI in sales and the related industry has been somewhat volatile, rising from slightly above 1 to 6 in 2015 to -2 in 2016 and currently sitting at 6 again in 2021. The ECI for transportation and materials moving has shown steady growth from just below 2 in 2011 to just below 3 in 2021. This is in large part due to the rise of Amazon. The ECI in educational services and hospitals has been somewhat stagnant the past 10 years between 1 and 2. Igor, can you tell us a little bit more about these changes in ECI?
Sure. They just like inflation of goods and services, inflation in jobs, ECI, is inconsistent across the occupations and even across industries. Like if I would ask audience, what do you, in your opinion, is the highest ECI in 2022? I'm sure you will, you can actually answer if you want in the chat, but I'm sure you will mention some of the areas that are obvious. Transportation, technology, real estate, financial services, of course, nursing, home health, probably the highest of them all. Home care, nursing and home care increased more than 7%, while other jobs increased only 3 to 4%. So again, just like if you break your CPI, the inflation, to components like food, energy, transportation, healthcare, consumables, and so on and so forth, you will see different inconsistent growth or increases. Same happens with the job, and monitor and understand those trends is very important for your internal policy, for your recruitment, retention, and reward policies and practices. We're trying to move to the next slide, and I will see why it's not moving. My apologies for the delay. Okay. This slide actually is very important, and it's a continuation of this conversation about how do you read the labor market, how do you read ECI, and how do you structure your pay increases or your pay structure movements. We call this slide "Rising Tides Lift All Boats," which is the famous quote of Milton Friedman, a famous 20th century American economist. And we, of course, paraphrasing the same, but not equally. What you see here is a chart that shows the bottom 25% of income. Those are jobs. Excuse me. And of course, you see orange line, which is top 25% of income. So the blue line would represent your semi-skilled labor, your support, clerical, technical, and the orange line would represent your top professionals, management, and senior leadership. You can see there's multiple reasons that affect wages. And because of minimum wages, one of the major players here, why increases of low wage jobs are higher, and you can see this trend continues since 2016, than for for highest paid, high wage jobs. Shortage, of course, of post-COVID technical and skilled, semi-skilled labor is very much influencing this trend. And on top of it is shrinking number of blue-collar jobs. What we usually recommend HR departments is if you have a skilled, qualified, skilled labor, try to keep them, retain them, because hiring them would be very difficult year over year for many reasons, and we will show you slide why we believe that. And of course, migration of low-wage workers to other higher-paid industries, but also transitioning of some blue-collar jobs into white-collar jobs due to increase in technology and additional skill requirement because of complexity, because many of those jobs become knowledge-based jobs in the labor market. This is how we would recommend addressing assigning jobs to pay grades if you know how they influence in the external labor market. And if you, of course, know that it's consistent with your internal job evaluations. So let's say that we study accounting and we use multiple sources, and we found that this is the range for accountant job for incumbents and well-positioned, experienced middle-level accountant, 27 to 34. The numbers are fictitious, of course. You on the right, you can see the matrix of your pay structure. In this case, it built based on 50% bandwidth with 10% separation between midpoints. And this is where you're trying to find exact position within your pay structure for that market range. And of course, you have to look and make sure that it does not contradict your internal job evaluation, a relationship between jobs. So you want to make sure that your accounting supervisor is still well positioned and there's enough separation between them.
Our last topic that we'll go in today is pay increases. Underpaying people, overpaying people, they don't resolve your employment issues and they just exacerbate them.
And we can discuss again difference between cost of living versus cost of wages. Just a reminder that cost of living would be our based on our CPI, and of course how expensive or less expensive it is to live in different geographic area, while cost of wages is how much you pay for certain jobs or similar jobs within those geographic areas. Now, recent studies show that cost of labor actually influence much more on geographic pay policy than cost of living. And just to give you, again, perspective of what's happening here, let's say that we're moving from Tucson, Arizona to San Francisco, California. And I am an accountant with $100,000 salary. And I know that cost of living in San Francisco is much higher than that in Tucson, Arizona. So in San Francisco, to buy the same goods and services, the same basket of goods and services as in Tucson, I probably would need more than $100,000. And we studied this and we realized that the cost of living is 189%, meaning I would need about $190,000 salary. But that is based on cost of living, that estimate. However, if we study labor market and salaries for accountants in San Francisco, we found that cost of wages actually is much less, much lower. That I don't expect to get $190,000 as an accountant. I probably expect to get $145,000. So while cost of living is 90% higher, cost of wages only 45% higher. That is very common. And that could go either way, up and down. You can see in this chart here that some states still try to use CPI-U as differential, but majority of this is, by the way, the recent study conducted by PayScale. Majority of respondents said that they use cost of wages and rely on that indicator more than on cost of living when they set the geographic differentials and policies.
Igor, we've talked a lot about it, but can you tell us one more time why we don't want to use COLA to set pay increases annually?
Yeah. And the reason we keep repeating, Ellen, is because many, especially government agencies, they still use COLA, and they continue rely when they do their pay adjustments on cost of living, while cost of living is the most volatile indicator. Again, it was 9.5 in June of 2022. It is 4% now. In June of 2022, the core inflation is the same CPI-U less two most volatile components, food and energy. The core inflation was 5%. So it was 9.5, but core inflation was 5%. Today, it's 4%, CPI-U is 4%, but core inflation is 5% still. What it means is that you see some of the components of CPI, they're so volatile, they change, they go up, they go down. It just, but the salaries, once you give employee increase, it will not go down. Once you adjust your pay structure for minimum, well, we want you to try take money away from your employees or to reduce the pay structure, to say, try to tell your engineer, your pay structure will start at minimum of $64,000, but we decided that's too much. Okay, I guess, Ellen, I guess I'm just getting sidetracked from our conversation.
Igor, what about merit-based increases? What's the major downside of these?
This is interesting. The whole idea of merit. I mean, if we're looking at semantics of that term, it suggests that something that I have to earn, that something that based on my contribution to the organization, my effort, level of my input in organizational performance. And yet merit is used mostly like across the board increase. Everybody gets 3% and 4%. In some organization, employees just go to the next step in their step system. That is an issue. It has an element of pay for performance, but it's often applied across the board increase, losing the main intent of merit increase.
Igor, how about straight pay for performance? Do I really want a subpar paramedic working on me?
You do not. I don't want the physician that was rated average to perform my surgery. And in some industries, actually pay for performance, in our opinion, in many cases, it's the service industry, is so difficult to define. I mean, really, how do you define performance of the doctor that did everything that doctor could, but patient died in the surgery room? Sorry if I'm depressing our audience, but the thing is, pay for performance, in our opinion, is not good, is not that effective in service environment. And as you know, 75 to 78% of our industry, our economy, is service economy. And the main problems are difficulty to define performance. Sometimes it's just based on conduct or behaviors. And in many cases, the small variance between the awards of excellent employees and middle level employees. You give excellent employee 4% and middle employee 3%, and that's just a 1 percentage point that really doesn't make much difference. And of course, somebody will get it affects employee morale and dissatisfaction.
Igor, how about just a broad across the board increase? How would this work?
It would work probably the best if we use flat increases, flat dollar increases, or percentages of the midpoint of the grade. In this case, those below the midpoint, employees below the midpoint, and employees above the midpoint will receive different percentage, but exact same flat dollar amount. That's what probably will mitigate pay dispersion that happens year over year. Like if you're at the top of the range and I'm at the bottom, and we receive 4%, each of us receive 4% of our salary for next 10 years, we will grow apart so bad in 10 years. I will never reach you in terms of salary. We will just grow apart. But the
Igor,
best...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Igor, if the organization has the time and ability, are market-based adjustments the preferred method?
I'd say that market should be considered, because how can you recruit and retain qualified staff if market pays more for similar jobs? But there's some other components. I mean, in some cases, combination would be probably the best approach to use, let's say, general increase and market increase. And of course, market increase also is important based on your approach to employee wage progression, or what we call wage penetration, like where employee belongs within the range. Do you have that system? Does HR actually know exactly what is the driver that will determine employee position within the range, whether employee is 60th percentile or 75th, at the top of the range, at the bottom of the range? What do we use? Experience, education, tenure, seniority, and so on and so forth. But the combination probably would work best for our HR departments and organizations. I'm going to talk just a little bit quickly about the fact that jobs evolve, and as they evolve, HR departments need to follow and document of course, in job descriptions and job analysis, why they evolve and how they evolve. And this is important because it changes jobs value. As you can see, this is a McKinsey & Company study, a recent study that suggests that over the next 10 years, the higher cognitive, social, and emotional skills, like initiatives, entrepreneurship, leadership, creativity, and of course technological skills will dominate, will grow, and will take bigger portion of even non-exempt, if I was saying non-exempt jobs, even skilled labor. And this is something that continuously changes external job values. And as it changes external job values, we need to regrade the job. We need to adjust pay range for the job. And that is something we need to be aware of. I'm going to move to the next slide. And
so as we get to the end of our presentation, the last line of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald is, "So we beat on, votes against the current. Employers, especially public sector HR employers, have to continue despite existing pay policies, despite past practices, we have to continue. So some things to keep in mind as you continue to reform your pay policies. Employers have to look within for certain roles, especially those that are highly technical or specialized. And for this, retention is key. Employers have to start attracting qualified applicants by providing significant on-the-job training opportunities. Many applicants will start coming to you without a formal four-year degree. Speaking of that, employers should update their minimum qualifications if a degree is not truly necessary, or if experience can be substituted for a degree requirement. The jobs that existed 10 years ago will not exist as they do now in 10 years from now. Employers have to update their job descriptions based on the changing nature of positions. The labor market will continue to have a significant impact on internal pay structures. Employers cannot ignore this if they want to attract and retain qualified applicants. Employers should consider their pay range width, the pay grade separations, and the pay grade overlaps in comparison to the local labor market when setting annual salaries. Employees have to continue to think about workspace arrangements. In 2020, if 2020 only taught us one thing, it's that most work can be performed virtually anywhere and anytime while still meeting performance standards. If employers are not able to offer some flexibility and hybrid work for their employees, they may also face recruitment and retention issues. Employers have to continue to create a purposeful, meaningful work for their employees. Employees want to know the why and understand the impact of their work. Employers have to do all of this while striving for equity, diversity, and inclusion in their workplaces. Igor, can you wrap us up for us?
Absolutely. This is one of the last slides, and I'll go real quick over it. So we call it, we titled this "Goodbye Blue Brick Road." We try to make reference to blue-collar jobs, and you can see the trend is that you see the blue line, blue bar here shows that those blue-collar jobs have added 12% more of them every 5 years, have bachelor's degree requirement now. And the jobs that don't require bachelor's degree, actually, number of those jobs shrinking. And the total growth of this gray bar, total growth of blue-collar jobs, going slower and slower year over year, even though we need those jobs more and more. That, of course, is indicator that many of those jobs, I guess there's not enough qualified staff to do those jobs, and maybe not enough schools. But most importantly, many of those jobs transition from paraprofessional to professional. Like one example would be the wastewater operators or water operators that been traditionally non-exempt jobs, but because of the SCADA system, since it was introduced, and because of work in a software and specialized application and making decisions and analyzing some of the data, they become now professional level jobs. The only thing certain about change, that's of course. And this is our last slide. I just go over this real quick and explain that we do need to monitor new trends that, by the way, some of them been there for a long while, and like flat organizational structures from hierarchical organization, or higher staff engagement, inconsistent wage inflations, where they were stable in 20th century, and they didn't move that fast that much. Of course, team culture versus individual contributor culture. And of course, influencing pay structures are influenced by external market and growing number of jobs with high cognitive, social, and emotional skill requirements. We have to constantly monitor and identify those jobs and reevaluate them, both internally and externally. That concludes our today's presentation.
If anyone has any questions, you can put those in the chat. We'll stick around for a few minutes.
Thank you guys. Before we start taking questions and heading out, I just wanted to thank Igor and Ellen for a wonderful and informative presentation. And thank you everybody for being here today. I posted the link to the recorded webinar where you'll be able to find it later on today, this afternoon. It's our website, cpshr.us/webinars, and you can find it under the recorded webinars tab. I will post it again in the chat. But again, thank you to Ellen and Igor, and everyone have a great rest of your week. Stay on to take questions. But again, thank you.
Cordell, if you have a question, can you type it in the chat bar, please?
Yes. I was gonna
That's just fine.
because I was gonna say thank you. And I was mesmerized by it. So good. When I was looking at the overall compensation study, I was like, ooh, because I was